Once again, please join me in welcoming the author of Call Me By Your Name, André Aciman. So thank you so much for coming here to Toronto to be with us all, to take in the film. We, of course, want to talk about the film and the creative adaptation, but I'd like to start by returning to your novel and to your writing, as we consider what a wonderful complement they are to each other, the film and the novel. And so to start, I thought we could talk about desire, because it holds such a force. It's a force in a lot of your work, and how it consumes our thoughts, how it influences our behavior, propels us into action, or more often than not, produces inaction. What fascinates you about desire?
Desire is probably something that we don't always talk about. We may say we want something, but desire is fundamentally a very embarrassing moment in our lives. When we desire someone, we don't tell our friends, we don't tell the people who are close to us. We keep it to ourselves, and eventually we give off, if we are bold enough, we give off some signs, and then a few more signs. And if we don't get any reciprocation, we sort of bottle the whole thing, and you make a pickle out of it until it becomes an obsession. And most loves are, in fact, obsessive. And I was always interested in obsessive loves because this is how I approached the people that I desired in my life, with obsession, shame, reluctance, resentment, and always hoping to find a way that I could hate them so that I could stop wanting them. And sometimes they were even nice to me, and so now I'm holding it against them. But desire is this thing that you can't even localize it because you don't know where it begins, where it ends, and it makes you behave in ways. And think about it, it makes you behave in ways that are counterintuitive and against the very things that you want. You become an enemy unto yourself. And I was always fascinated by all this nonsense that goes in our heads when we desire someone and we don't have the courage to come out and say so.
And in an interview I read, you were talking about your process, and you said, I get to the bottom of things by running circles around them. How do you run circles around desire to try to understand it?
Well, I think that when you try to understand desire, you're already doing battling. You're battling it because you're trying to find what it is. What is it that I want from so-and-so? Do I want to touch them? Do I want to kiss them? Do I want them to like me? No, I may not. I mean, you're going through this whole crazy, nonsensical dialectic with the very thing that you want the most and that you actually feel tenderness for. Because that's the other thing that happens, is that when you desire someone, you actually want to be nice to them. And you find yourself, if you are in my shoes, as I've been so many times in my life, trying to be sort of difficult with them. You become spiteful, you become angry at them because you're angry at yourself. But that's not how we always love people, because we do love people and people do love us. I'm not talking about that. This is a particular moment in our lives when things are fundamentally difficult, as they are for Elio. You can see Elio is fighting with himself, with his own reluctance and his desire and his shame. Should I speak? Should I not speak? Is it better to speak or to die? He quotes.
And I mean, the most striking thing in the novel is the way that you capture this interior narrative. How do you get inside the heads of your characters?
I invent that. Well, I mean, you have to, I think we are all many, many people in us. We're really a legion of individuals who have to cohabit with one another, and they don't all get along, which is why we see shrinks. Because there's a part of us that refuses to talk to the other part. And when they meet in the street, they don't even look at each other. So you really are, I'm exaggerating, of course, but if you're all laughing, it's because you understand and you share in my pain. But I mean, it's a very difficult thing. You immerse yourself in something that you have felt. You may not have felt it for X, you may have felt it for Y, or you may have felt it because you wanted to buy, as happened once with me. There was a particular, I'm going to depart for a second. I wanted to buy a particular tie, a necktie, and I fell in love with that tie. It was beautiful, it was extremely expensive. So I would go to the store and I would look at the tie, and the tie would talk back to me and basically say, yeah, you want me, I know, I can tell. Everybody wants me. Well, I want to be the only one to want you. Okay, fine, you're the only one. I mean, we're having this back and forth, so I'd go back to the store time and time again, trying to find a way in which I could stop liking it. Because it's really a stupid tie, it's a piece of cloth, I don't need it, and it costs a fortune. But of course, something else was driving me. I wanted the tie because it was going to impress people. Nobody gets impressed by a tie because nobody notices the tie. So what are you talking about? And this endless conversation. Now imagine if instead of a tie, I did this with a person. It's the same thing. So you go from whatever you know, whatever idiocy happens in your life, and you transport it into something else, into a person, or into a house. I would love certain houses, and I want to grow to hate them so that I would stop longing for them. And anyway, so that's the trajectory of desire.
You spoke about the ways in which we fool ourselves, and how desire, can sometimes be a trap. Is desire as much about self-discovery as it is about like a self-deception?
Well, at the very beginning of desire, the first stop, the first station in this Calvary, which we call love, the first stop is you notice someone, a person, you notice, and you want to know more. You want to touch. You want that person to like you too, to want you. That's the beginning stages. It's amorphous. But then it grows and it blossoms and it becomes something else. And it changes, of course it changes, because one voice in you is interrupting another voice in you, another direction is being taken. And it's like all these vectors conflicting with each other. And that's where I come in.
And you said that the book, the novel was about 4 months or so. You had a first draft. How did you accomplish that so quickly? Did you fall in love with writing about falling in love?
Yes, I did. I was writing another novel, and it was a difficult novel to write because I was taking it way too seriously, which I shouldn't have, but I did. And at some point, I woke up one morning. We were supposed to be in Italy. We were not going to go to Italy. I wanted to be in a house in Italy. I just began writing about a house in Italy and about a garden and a pine alley, because all nice houses in Italy have pine alleys. And that's all I did. And then I said, well, what's going to happen here in this house? Nothing needs to happen. There's a beach. You go to the beach, you come back, you go and you eat. But eventually I said, well, something has to happen. And I decided to make it a boy meets boy story. And that carried me along. And it was so consuming that I think I fell in love with each one of them. I fell in love with their love. I fell in love with the house. I fell in love with the land. I fell in love with the whole thing, to the point where nothing else mattered. And for me to basically give up a dinner in order to write is unthinkable. But I would I would just eat very fast and go back to writing. So within a week, I had written like 40 pages. And I sent them to a friend of mine who lives in France. And he said, I don't want to read this. I want to read it until you finish it. So I was now having an incentive to finish it. It was going to be very simple. I was going to finish the story, and Oliver was going to die. Wow. He had to die. Of course, that's how you get rid of a character, okay? And there would have been no nonsense between them. There would have been no love, nothing. It would have been a fantasy, fine. We all have fantasies. And that would have been the end of it. But I said, no, they have to meet. They have to at least confront each other, because that's the thing. And from the confrontation to at least a kiss, okay, just a kiss. As I said last time when I was here speaking, there's the kiss, and then, of course, they have to have sex. And, okay, one time, okay? But then, of course, why one time? Well, make it 2, 3, then the peach. Oh,
You shouldn't have skipped dinner, you know, you went straight there.
I went to the fruit, okay? But it was like, where the peach? What is this peach doing in the middle of this book? I had no idea I was going to do this with a peach. But why not? A peach is a peach, and so I said, fine. And when I showed the manuscript to the editor, I said, you know, there's this thing with a peach. It's kind of sticky, you know? And he said, no, the peaching is good. I said, you think so? Yeah, so we went on. And of course, but that's how something grows. And it was so fast because I was literally consumed. I don't think, it was like falling in love. And at the age in which I wrote the book, falling in love is a bit more difficult. So, but it worked. Whatever happened, it was fine.
I mean, you brought up the peach scene, so...
Oh, God.
You
No,
know,
I
you
didn't
mentioned
mention it.
But my question with that, and even one of my favorite scenes in the film, and we'll talk about the film in a moment, but is the scene also inspired by your writing of Elio exploring Oliver's swimming trunks, so subtly done in the film, but the image of the 3 on the faucet harkens back to the novel as well. But you take your readers to these really honest places about desire and sex that might seem shocking on first read, but for a lot of people deep down, there's an honesty there that they might have not even revealed to themselves.
Right.
How do you go to the corners of desire in that way?
Well, there's a wonderful moment in Rousseau's Confessions. I'm not being a professor. Rousseau's Confession, he's quoting Jesus. And Jesus says, and Rousseau confesses the most ugly things that he's done in his life. And he says, if you are without sin, cast the first stone at me. And that's the attitude I have when I write. If I want to write something that I have felt, and it's usually quite bold, if not downright salacious, I will write it down with the understanding that I'm not telling you anything you didn't know in yourself. If you haven't done this, you've thought about it. Okay? And I know this for a fact. And how do I know it? Because I felt it. If I felt it, you felt it. So whenever I write anything, and I want to write about the things that are the most honest, if filthy, about me, I will do it with the understanding that you can't cast a stone at me and say, haha, he's disgusting, he's done it with a peach, because you may have thought other things that are no better, okay? And I'm not going to ask you because there's too many of you, but I will take a census.
In addition to being about first love and desire, Call Me By Your Name is also about what it means to be a good parent. There's that incredible speech by Professor Perlman, and it's done so beautifully in the film by Michael Stuhlbarg. From the very beginning, did you want to Elio to have good parents, to have supportive parents?
Well, I wanted him to have the kind of parents I had. And my parents were extremely open-minded and very liberal. So, in fact, there was very little that I could do that was wrong. And my problem was that I wasn't doing wrong things enough, certainly for my father, who was a very open-minded person. So there was no sense ever of rebellion. What am I going to rebel against? Things that I believe in, which is what my father had taught me, to be open and accepting of everything, and to be shameful, at least not vis-a-vis yourself, of anything. So the parenting came naturally to me, and those were the kind of parents that I would have wanted to portray. How did the scene come up? I have no idea. I mean, it's one of those things that happens when you're writing. The father meets the son, says, you had a good time. I'm no idiot, by the way. I know what you guys did. Okay, he could have done it that way. But I figured, no, that's not the kind of parent I had, and not kind of parent I want to be. And ultimately, I would like, because I think that if there is a message in anything I do, I would like it to be the kind of parent every person in this room wished they had been or want to be if the situation comes up. It's to be supportive of whatever somebody does with his body that is not damaging to the body and to others, of course. And to have that kind of attitude, it's, I mean, if my son says something dreadful that he's done, I have no idea what, because as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing they could do wrong. But I want to be that kind of a father. And I would want to have the privilege of having a son who would confide in me if it comes to that.
I think it's a testament to your writing, but also the film that that speech has resonated so much. Everyone who's seen it. One of the debates about the film, but that applies to the novel as well, is that the story takes place in a bubble off in the country. There's no danger, no prejudice, no disease. And I think there's those who encounter the film and find it so refreshing to see a love story that is just itself, especially a love story between two men that is just as it is. There are others who desire from that a bit more, context, or if it's set in the 80s, that the AIDS crisis might be happening at that time, or that it feels as if there might lack some reality as to what's happening in the world. Did you consider these outside forces when you wrote the novel and how they might encroach on the relationship?
I considered it, but it was not interesting to me. Usually I'm very ahistorical in what I write. I don't even tell you the geographical places. I don't like details. I hate realism as a genre in literature. I wanted the love of two men to exist as it should exist, outside of disease, outside of prejudice, outside of danger, outside of bullying and all that stuff. Yes, those things exist and they will exist. But does that mean that we cannot have a love story between two men that's not articulated and colored by that? That's not possible. What kind of love is that going to be? You're going to live in a bubble all the time? The bubble is, in fact, the one of persecution. And here what we're doing is it's not even a bubble, it's opening up. It's saying, this house, this city, this world, this universe is open to love in any form it comes. Thank God.
I agree. And so the film, 8 years in the making. What was the process like of having the book optioned into the film?
Slow. It was optioned right away. I think within the first 9 months it was optioned, which was great. Oh, they're going to make a movie. You're talking about 2008 now. And then, of course, they had a director. They had a screenwriter. The screenwriter had to back off because he had to go to something, to do another TV series. So we found another screenwriter, but that didn't really work. Besides, we had two actors who wanted to play the roles. They really loved the role. Okay, great. Then we had a director. Then we didn't have the two actors. Then we didn't have the director. Then we didn't. It kept going back and forth like that for a while, until at the very end there was James Ivory came on the scene, and I said, "Oh, James Ivory is fantastic. He's an institution." And then they said, "No, but maybe Luca Guadagnino is going to direct it." I said, "Luca Guadagnino is the dream of every writer, especially one who writes about the senses." I mean, if those of you who have seen I Am Love, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It takes place in a very beautiful house. Everything is supernaturally sort of saturated with the senses. I said, he's the right person. And suddenly, of course, as my agent would say, they haven't started rolling yet, so it doesn't count. So as soon as it was optioned many times because the options runs out. And eventually they started filming, and then I got a call. They said, would you like to come and visit the set? I said, you mean there really is one? And so there was a set, and I came on the set, and they said, by the way, would you like to be part of the movie? I said, yeah, I'll help out in whichever way you want, thinking they wanted me to do some stupid function. They said, no, we want you in the film. I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. And I was very nervous because I wasn't aware that, I would have to learn lines, me. And of course, I didn't have to learn any lines. I just had to converse, and that was easy. It was very simple, and I enjoyed it tremendously.
It looked like you had a lot of fun with Amira in that scene.
Oh, yes. Amira and I, we became friendly at that spot because we discovered that we liked the same author, and we discussed the author, and we kept laughing because we made jokes with each other. So it was just the most relaxing situation in the world. And I suspect that everybody in the film feels the same way. There was a sense of intimacy, relaxation, friendship among everybody, from the camera people down to the actor, the smallest actor. They were all wonderful.
And during the introduction, you asked the audience to pay attention to the scene at the fountain, which you were on set for. What was it like to see that scene brought to life when Elio reveals his feelings?
It was wonderful because I arrived by cab to the set and they're filming this scene, which for me is the most difficult scene to have written because I wanted Elio to say to Oliver that he has some feelings. Well, he doesn't say anything. He says, "I know nothing." Remember when he says that? "I know nothing about the things that really matter." What things that matter? Things, you know, that sort of thing. And I wanted that conversation to be as indirect and as amorphous as possible because, as I said, if Oliver understood what Elio was saying to him, then he was already on the same wavelength. He wanted what Elio wanted. And he understood right away what he meant. He was just trying to make sure. And the first instant is, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to discuss these things. We haven't done anything we're ashamed to be ashamed of. Let's not go on. And right away, of course, Elio disobeys.
How did you position yourself in relation to the adaptation? Did you have any apprehensions about it, or were you completely hands-off as to your involvement?
I said to the movie directors that I had had my say. I had written my book. I knew that the book was not going to be possible. It was not going to be possible for the book to be transcribed and transported into the movie. It was not going to be possible. There had to be some adaptations made. And I sort of surrendered to that. I totally accepted that. I didn't want to be the kind of author who's a pain in the neck and who complains because they changed his this, his that. And I just had no patience with that. I hated authors who did that. Accept the movie. The movie is a different medium anyway, and it does things sometimes that a book cannot do. And you have to go with that understanding, which is exactly what I told Luca. As soon as I saw the last scene, I said, your last scene is better than my last scene. And yet it's totally different.
Yeah, that ending is really incredible. And it's such a great visual representation of the book because the internal narrative is everything.
I agree.
Yeah. Did you, is there another scene or moment that James and Luca pulled out of the book and represented visually that you feel represents the spirit of your writing?
I'm trying to think, besides the father's speech,
right,
and besides the conversation between I mean, the rest of the scene when Elio plays on the piano, the guitar, and then plays the three variations by three composers. I wanted that, and they took that and they played it exactly the same way. And basically, when Elio plays it the way that Army had asked him, Oliver, okay? When Oliver asked him to play it the first time, he finally plays it only when Oliver leaves the room, and then he walks back in and listens to them and says, "Yeah, that's the piece." Basically, he doesn't say anything, and that was in the book, and I loved the fact that they retained that. It was like it's one of the first instances of flirtation, teasing and flirting.
And it's musical in a way.
Yeah,
even,
well.
Yeah. As with any creative adaptation, there are things, of course, that don't make their way to the screen. And so some of the key ones for your novel are Vimini, the 10-year-old neighbor who becomes a good friend to Oliver, the extended trip to Rome, and of course, the final chapters. You've been very open about giving the story over, but are there any of these elements that you miss at all, or is that just the nature of film adaptation?
Well, I mean, the trip to Rome was a whole chapter, and it was a long thing, and it started with basically the two going to a hotel, playing with each other, but not consuming the act, and therefore retaining this kind of edgy feeling throughout the whole chapter, and not making love at the very end because of the circumstances. That whole Roman expedition is just missing. But is it that necessary? It didn't contribute anything to the plot. nor do the 20 years that come afterwards contribute to the story itself. This is all afterthought, or sort of the after years. And they're not that important to the plot. And I was perfectly willing to accept that. The little trip to Bergamo, when they go to that little town, which you don't even see the town because actually it's a beautiful town. For those of you who know Bergamo, it's sort of a classic little town in Italy. And it's minuscule, but what the most important part is the farewell at the train station and the call to the mother. And I don't know how many of you picked up the fact that as he's calling the mother and he's just about ready to sob, there's a woman sort of sitting on a bench fanning her face with a fan. It's just these little things. These were not in the book, but my God, I should have put them in the book. So I'm extremely happy with the way this whole thing turned out.
That moment that you just spoke about illustrates the way, and I mean the way we saw the audience who would come again to see it, that there's something about this film that demands repeat viewings, that you really fall into the story and the characters in the world again. And I'm wondering what, there's a relationship, I think, to time and to memory that comes from the repeat viewing that I think we see in the novel in a way. One of the differences is that the film's taking place in real time. The relationship is happening to Elio in real time. But in the book, he's in his later years and telling about this summer. Is there for you a relationship between desire and memory, desire and time? Is there something you're circling around with that?
It's a good question. Can you tell me the difference between desire and memory? I can't, because they kind of bleed into each other all the time. Memory and desire, desire and memory. Do you remember what you wanted? And I think that the most important part, and I think the audience understands this, and the readership does too, is that you don't know exactly why you connect to the sadness of the film. I've always tried to understand, why is it that people get so sad in a story that's not fundamentally sad? And you try to understand, what is it that kicked in? And I always think that it's really, you're going back in this film to a moment in every person's past where you wanted something and never had it. But just wanting it didn't make it go away, and not having it didn't make it disappear either. In other words, you still want it, and you have retained the memory of that want, of that desire. It has never gone away. And you find it in the film here, something that could have happened to you, but never did, and might still. This is the whole dimension. The resonance of this film is sort of located in this time warp. Is it the past? Is it the present? Or is it even the future that will never occur because you're no longer 17? But you can remember being 17. You're still 17 because the person you were in love with when you were 17, you're still in love with when you're 60. So where do I fit myself? And I think that tear that occurs is exactly why we begin to feel a bit teary, and we begin to sort of tear up inside us, because we haven't really made peace with ourselves and cannot.
On the question of longevity and desire, Luca has said that he wants to continue with these characters and use the source material from your novel to explore their later years. I think he mentioned 5 films at one point. How do you feel about continuing the journey with Elio and Oliver?
I think Elio and Oliver, Timmy and Army, have said that anything that Luca wants to do, they'll do. They'll drop whatever they're doing in order to do that. And I think that everybody on the crew feels the same way. And I feel the same way. If Luca says, Andre, we're going to do a sequel, it's going to be part 1, fine, I'm coming. And I think everybody wants to continue that relationship because it is essential to everybody. It is just so meaningful, and I don't know why. Now, Luca wants to do 1 part, 2 part, because he wants to see the young actors sort of age. He doesn't want to put makeup on them to make them look older. He wants them to really get older. And, you know, he could do this till he is, 70 years old, and they're 50 and whatever. Why not? I won't be around, but that's a different issue. Uh, but somebody else will take over. But it's a very appealing idea, even if it never happens. The very thought that we're all talking about sequels is itself already a sign that we don't want to let go. We don't want to let go of the film. We don't want to let go of who we were, and we don't even know what the difference is.
Your novel has meant so much to so many people, and I think, as you were saying before, that you're constantly surprised at the people who come up to you and have a response to the film. How does it feel to know that readers, but also then people who now have encountered your book through the film, have responded in such a strong, visceral way to these characters?
Well, if I had a big ego, but I don't. I'm humbled by all these people who love this story, and I have to learn how to accept that. And I don't think I have. It's very difficult when you're a person like me who basically, I didn't even have the courage to submit the manuscript to the agent. That was already difficult. This was a dirty story with a peach in it. And I was going to hand it to a woman who's an agent and who's, of a certain age. So I was embarrassed. She's going to read this and think I'm filthy. So I'm so sort of insecure and sort of disbelieving in my own capacity that when somebody tells me they love my book, I say, yeah, sure you did. But it's because I have difficulty accepting praise and the fact that people connect with me. It's a great feeling to know that what came out of my head, twisted as my head is, resonates with so many people. And it's a great pleasure. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. It just makes me very happy. It tells me also, in case you guys don't know it, that if I'm sick and twisted.
On that note, we'll open it to the floor for your questions in just a moment. So think on them. But while we do, can you tell us a little bit about Enigma Variations, your newest novel?
Yes, the Enigma Variations is a novel that takes place in many places. It starts in Italy, and it's a story that's very reminiscent of Call Me By Your Name. It's about a 12-year-old boy who falls in love with a 27-year-old man and doesn't know the first thing about sex. And I think it was difficult to write because you don't want to let on that the kid knows what he really wants. The reader knows. And basically, the parents eventually will know too. But the kid has no idea. So he's agonizing. And I wanted to catch this agony in the rawest possible way, the way a kid might want a toy or an adult a necktie, as I said. But I wanted to capture that feeling, and it was not easy to do. And the rest of the story is basically about a man who loves a woman, he also loves a man, he falls in love with another man, he falls in love with a woman, drops her for another man, go back and forth and back and forth. And because I do think that sexuality is, I mean, we all think we understand it, we don't. It is so fluid, it is so amorphous, that the moment we give it a name, it already has changed on us. And it always makes us look like idiots. We thought we wanted this, sure enough we want that. And we can't make up our minds because we want them all. And that's Enigma Variations, the idea being that we are enigmatic unto ourselves.
All right, to your questions, we have microphones, so please put your hand up high and we will get you a microphone. Let's go right there with the first one.
Well, first of all, I want to say I thought your novel was excellent, so thank you very much. But you talked about how these characters want something for all their life they may never have. And then you also would support the director having perhaps 1 through 5 follow-ups. How do you reconcile the difference between wanting something all your life and never having it to having a follow-up of getting what you want?
If you get what you want, it will be taken away from you. And I mean, if that's how you want to have the stories, the sequels, in other words, nothing is ever going to be resolved. If you're expecting a resolution to their love, then what you want really is, you want closure. And I am the last person to believe in closure. Nothing is ever closed. In fact, you die. And if you're lucky, the next generation will find closure for you and send it to the hereafter for you. Because there is no such thing as closure. There's no answer. And I believe that.
Over on this side here.
Hi. My question is, would you ever consider giving Oliver a last name, or was it intentional to kind of add to the mysteriousness of his character to just leave him as just Oliver?
Well, the name Perlman was not my invention. The name Perlman came from Luca, the other screenwriters. They gave him a last name. If you remember in the novel, he is called, Oliver has no last name, Elio has no last name, and the professor is Pro, or Prof, if you want. That's all he was. And that was good enough. And she is Mrs., if I'm not mistaken, Mrs. P. That's what he calls her. He doesn't give her a last name. And the town is called B. So I hate, anything that sort of helps the reader anchor the person in a particular identity, in a particular city. I didn't even want to say 1983. That was a director. I said mid-'80s, or whatever it is, late '80s. That was good enough for me. I love this kind of ambiguity, and it goes sort of hand in hand with the kind of ambiguity that you have vis-a-vis their sexuality. It is not a defined sexuality. So nothing is defined.
I think there's a question down here in the second row. Microphone's coming.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful book. I can say without joking that it has changed my life. Just a little detail that I've been stuck on. The second night when Elio goes to find Oliver and he's in the shed, what does he discover about Nkezi? Because when I first read it, I thought, and it wasn't probably until the fourth time I saw the movie, and Elio gives a little look when he's walking out the gate, and I thought, okay, what is that about? And also, what was Mrs. Perlman going to be suspicious about when Oliver brought the gift many years later?
Oh, no. To go back to the gift, that's in the book. He brings her a gift, but she has become a bit paranoid.
Yeah, because Elio says you better tell her what it is because she's suspicious of everybody.
Yeah, because she thinks you're going to poison her or something like that.
Oh.
She's become sort of demented a bit, okay? She's old.
Oh.
Okay, it's that simple.
Okay.
But I didn't want to explain that.
Oh.
Now you made me explain it, and look how ridiculous it sounds, okay?
It's great! No, it's wonderful.
There's never any closure.
But you had a first part to the Anchise. It's a weird moment in the writing of the book. Anchise, remember that moment when Oliver shows that he has a scar because he scraped his sort of whatever, his hip, and Anchise puts a brew on it and it wasn't working. The reason is that Anchise and Oliver, when I was writing the book, something was going on in my head. And I said, no. And I stopped there. I didn't go any further. But the traces, I didn't want to remove the traces of whatever it was that had crossed my mind. And you picked up on it. Yeah. Yeah. But, Luca also picked up on it. So you're not the only one.
Microphone here, and then is there one back there? Great, we'll go here first and then back.
Yes, sir.
Novel as yet. I've just seen the film. One thing that struck me the first time I saw it, and now again, was the character of Maritza. Maritza?
Yes, Marzia.
Marzia. In a sense, I think she's almost the only character who actually is really hurt, really suffers in a sense of how she's been treated, and how, in a sense, Elio reacts to her. I mean, she shows emotional maturity in terms of how she confronts him and says, "Can we be friends?" And his response to that. I'm just wondering whether it was, I don't know if in the novel, for example, that's something that you developed later on in terms of her.
No.
So how would you sort of view that? Or
I think that I would, had I been the director of the film, I would have left the whole Marzia episode hanging and left it alone. It didn't need a resolution. But I think in films you need some kind of, again, that word, that hateful word, closure. Okay? You need to do something with this girl who's been left hanging there. And it makes Elio look kind of sort of strident and not very nice. So essentially, there has to be reconciliation. And it's a wonderful reconciliation because it's a friendship that now exists between two people who have been ex-lovers. And if you believe in the friendship between ex-lovers, there's proof of it. If you don't, then you're wiser than I am. Yes, she does show more maturity than he does, definitely. She comes up and talks to him.
Question there in the, there we are.
First of all, I want to thank you immensely for writing that book and being a part of this film, which is life-altering for me anyway. I wanted to ask you, and I'm sure you've had this question before, about the Jewish connection. Maybe I'm reading more into it, but I think that was sort of like the first connection that seemed to carry them, that bonding, right through the film.
Yes. I wanted there to be a connection that predated everything, even the physical relationship, so that if nothing happened between them, if friendship was going to be impossible between them, as there was a moment when it was almost on the brink of falling apart completely, there was always going to be this connection. Not that he was employed or living in the same house, but that they were both Jewish, and that the Jewishness in a city that had no other Jews made them, sort of already bonded them. But there's a second thing going on. Jewishness for me was also a metaphor for being gay. In other words, it basically made them stand apart from everybody else who was around them. It says, we have something in common that nobody else shares. And it's there. And so the Jewishness was basically a kind of springboard into the next phase of their relationship. It was not arbitrarily put there. And the fact that Elio begins to wear a Star of David already should say something.
There's a microphone here.
Hi, I absolutely love the book. I'm curious if you can elaborate on the Saint Clemente syndrome. You wrote a lot of it in chapter 3. I read one of your talk. You mentioned you like things with multiple layers. I'm wondering if it's a representation or metaphor of their developing relationship or their building personality or characters.
I think that it was one of the ways in which I tackled the idea that there's not only one side to us, that there's that there are many dimensions to us, and that whatever you see on the surface, as I don't know if you know where the Basilica of San Clemente is. It's a basilica in Rome, and it has a top part that was rebuilt because it burned down. Then there's a second tier, which is an older church. Then underneath it, there is a Mithraic temple that goes back to the pagan times when even Romans didn't accept Mithraic culture. So, and on the side of that, there's an older place where Christians used to meet. So I like the idea that there were 4 different layers in this one church. And if you remember, there's a moment in which the poet in the novel goes to Thailand and he meets this man who basically says, I'm not a man, I'm a woman. And then he says, oh, thank God you're a woman. And she says, well, not really, I'm really a man that looks like a woman. And he says, okay, fine, that's okay too. And she turns out to be a woman again. So the fact that we don't know, and it's all an exploration of our own sexuality. Where do we begin? Where do we belong in all this? What do we want? Whom do we want? Can we want multiple people and differently to do with them and to have them do to us what, you know, we couldn't have considered doing at the same time? That's what the San Clemente syndrome is. It basically takes this image of the church and projects it onto identity, sexuality, and the psyche itself. The psyche has many trapdoors, as I say in the book. Too many trapdoors.
There's a question here with the microphone there.
Hi. I wonder, would you ever consider writing a book on desire? Because you express it, like I'm sure a lot of us feel a lot of things you said, but never put words to. Like not even necessarily a novel, but just, you know, because you express it so well.
Well, thank you. I don't want to, because if I write an essay about desire that way, then I begin to pontificate, and desire is not a subject that one can pontificate about. So I feel much more comfortable. I do write essays, many essays, but that particular one I don't want to do because it belongs to the genre of fiction, where the not naming something is essential to fiction, whereas you cannot not name something in nonfiction, which is why I would hesitate to write something about desire in a nonfiction voice.
There's a question down here in the front row, if we can get a microphone down here, and I see there's one at the back. We'll go there first.
Yeah, I was wondering, between Oliver and Elio, who would you rather have as a lover yourself?
It's a good question. It's a good question. Can I send you a postcard? I have no idea. I have no idea. The problem is that now I can only see them as Timothy and as Armie Hammer. And I don't think they would be interested in me. And frankly, I don't think I'm very interested in them that way at all. But I do love, and I mean, this is the honest answer, I do love their love. However much I have fictionalized it, I think it's a beautiful love. And what is ironic is, and it's not ironic, is that they have developed for each other an amazing friendship. And you should see them together. They basically are like two brothers who have basically gone through a great vacation together and don't want it to let it go. And it's an amazing relationship. So their love, the love of Elio and Oliver, is amazing. I don't know that I will ever have a love like that in my life, but that's okay. It's nice to see it and to have created it.
Down here.
You mentioned you started writing the story because you missed a trip to Italy and you were thinking about the house.
Right.
I wondered what you thought of the look of the film.
Oh, the house is totally different. The book takes place on the Ligurian coast. This takes place in the middle of landlocked Italy. There's a lake that's an hour and a half away. There's a river that's nearby. The house looks totally different, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm perfectly happy with that house. In fact, I prefer that house. If I had the money, I would buy the house. I'm serious. I mean, the house is cheap, as it turns out, because it's pretty run down. They've peopled it beautifully. They've decorated it in an amazing way. But fundamentally, whatever changes they made are amazing. I mean, in the book, there's a swimming pool. There is no swimming pool in this movie. There's a little trough, okay? That's about it. But who cares? It doesn't matter. And the trees, by the way, for those of you who care to know about the peaches again, the peaches are artificially hanging on the tree. They took me close to a tree, said, see, this is the peach tree. I said, this is the peach tree. They look like they have like Band-Aids holding them to the tree. But it doesn't matter. I would prefer that house to the house that I had seen in Monet's painting anytime.
Yeah, are there microphones there? Yeah, we'll go to the back and maybe in this area here. Yeah, back there first.
You spoke so beautifully about desire, as somebody else said. I felt another thing that this novel and story is about is intimacy. So I was hoping you could speak beautifully to us about intimacy.
Why is everybody laughing? Intimacy is, I think intimacy is it's a strange little beast, because you can start being very intimate with someone at the beginning of a relationship. And contrary to what the trajectory is, people become less and less intimate. They begin to shut the door to the bathroom when once upon a time the bathroom door was open. And I'm talking from personal experience. Okay, it's very strange. So intimacy is the ability to be, and I'll use a big word, it's to be completely ductile to the other person. The other person is just basically pours into you and you pour into them. It is, among other things, the absence of complete shame vis-a-vis each other. Now, in the book, you have various scenes in which there's a bathroom scene, for those of you who have read the book. There's a vomit scene, which clearly is not depicted, though I love the vomit scene because I love vomit scenes in anything. and there's a moment in which Elio vomits, and Oliver looks at it and says, "Do you ever chew your peas?" So, I mean, it's disgusting, I admit, okay, but that's where my mind goes. No, but in point of fact, intimacy is, it's irreducible. You cannot define it. It's the ability to just become the other person and to want the other person to take over whoever you are, to the point where there is no such thing as you and me. Now, this is difficult to have occurring because every day we go to work, one goes to work, the other one goes to a different job, comes back, is tired, whatever. But intimacy is the ability to just cohabit completely. And what is beautiful is that it occurs especially when we're very young, and the doors that we build between individuals are sort of very thin. They're paper-thin walls. And I love that idea, because eventually those doors will become harder and harder to open until we become sort of locked onto ourselves, which is not a great thing. But I do think that what Oliver and Elio have is complete intimacy. There's no shame between them. They're calling each other by their own names. How more embarrassing can it be? Seriously, you're calling me by your name? But it means something. And if you think about it, in a moment of passion, when you call the other person by your name, you're giving them the biggest gift that you can ever give. You are me. I happen to like myself, you say, and therefore I'm giving you the best thing there is in the world. How could it be any better than that?
We have time for one more question. There's a microphone over here.
Yes, hi, and thank you for coming. I think a lot of readers and movie watchers love to have things set in particular places, and to be able to, even if they never have the chance to go to a location that's specified in a film or a book, to know that it's real, it's out there, that if they have the chance to go, they can touch and caress this story that they've so loved and enjoyed and that has touched them. Why your reticence to set specific locations and places and be that particular? Why deny us that pleasure?
Well, because I'm spiteful and cruel. No, because you called it a pleasure, correct? It's not necessarily a pleasure. You just want to be, you want to be located. You want to have the coordinates so that you can know exactly what you're dealing with. And that's the first thing I don't want you to do, because I want you to focus on something else. I don't want to give you the factoids that you require, because I want you to pay attention to the internal reality of each character. And that's what's more important to me as a writer. I'll give you a quick example. I wrote a book that takes place in New York City, probably in 2010, 2009. And it's about a couple that meets and that falls in love with each other. And it was about New York City on a winter week. It's a 1 week, takes place in 8 days. And a critic faulted me by saying, how can you write a novel about New York City after 9/11 and not mention 9/11, since 9/11 has affected all of us? And my answer was not because 9/11 is not important. Of course it's important. But it's because it doesn't have a place in my story. It has nothing to do with the kind of love and relationship that these two characters in my novel share. And it's the same thing about B. I don't want to call it anything by its name. In fact, I haven't even decided where that B is located because there are 2 towns in Liguria that start with B's. And I couldn't make up my mind which, and I didn't want to make up my mind. And in fact, if you want to go, you should visit both of them. and you will enjoy both because they're both beautiful. And that's the only answer I can give you. I'm so sorry.
I think that's a good answer to end on. Before we close, just a few reminders that André is generously joining us for a book signing following the event. I'll just ask that you please stay in your seats so that we can get him to the table and get a pen in his hand. If you want to consider this film again, we know that it's a repeat watchable film. James Ivory is joining us, the screenwriter of the film, on March 27th. If you enjoy conversations about books and film, our Books on Film series, hosted by Eleanor Wachtel of CBC Writers and Company, is starting next month. Really great lineup, so please join us for those events. Finally, the Oscar nominations are tomorrow morning. We'll all be waiting in anticipation with good, optimistic news about this wonderful film. You spoke so eloquently tonight about so many wonderful things. For those of us who have been so touched by your novel and your film, it's very special to have you here and to share in this story of Elio and Oliver. I speak for many of us, I'm sure, when I say that this is a novel and a film to which we will return over the years many times. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you all. Thank you.